The royal guard stood frozen at his post. Something was wrong. He had been trained for threats, intruders, protesters, emergencies. But this was different. This was silence. The kind of silence that makes a soldier's instincts scream. Meghan Markle had just walked past him. She had smiled, nodded, spoken 3 quiet words to the staff member beside her, and then she disappeared into the corridor. But the air she left behind felt heavy. The guard's name was Thomas. He had served the royal family for 11 years. He had stood outside rooms where history was made. He had escorted dignitaries. He had heard secrets whispered behind closed doors. He knew how to read a room. He knew how to read people, and something about the Duchess that morning told him everything was about to change. It was early. The sun had barely touched the windows of the palace. Most of the household was still asleep, but Meghan had been awake, dressed, composed. Too composed. Thomas replayed the moment in his mind. She had walked down the corridor with her assistant. Her footsteps were light, calm, but her eyes were not. They carried something he had seen before. In soldiers, in people who had made a decision they couldn't take back, she had glanced at him. Just for a second. And in that glance was an apology. He didn't know why, but he felt it. The assistant had asked her something in a low voice. Meghan had responded even quieter. Thomas couldn't hear the words, but he heard the tone. Steady. Final. Then she had paused, just for a heartbeat, and she had turned to him. She had said 3 words. Simple, polite, but they hit him like a warning bell. Guards don't get thanked like that. Not in the middle of the morning. Not unless something is ending. Thomas had nodded, said nothing, watched her walk away. Now he stood alone in the corridor. The morning light crept across the marble floor. Somewhere in the distance, a door closed. The sound echoed. He wanted to move, to check, to ask someone if they had noticed. But his training kept him still. A guard does not abandon his post. A guard does not react to feelings, but feelings were all he had right now. He thought about the last few weeks. The tension in the palace had been thick. Everyone felt it. Staff whispered in corners. Schedules changed without explanation. The Duchess had stopped attending certain events. The Duke had grown quieter. Thomas had overheard fragments. A journalist's name, a lawsuit, a letter that had gone missing. He didn't understand the details. He wasn't supposed to. But he knew conflict when he saw it. And this morning, that conflict had walked past him with a smile and a goodbye. He looked down the corridor, empty, silent, somewhere above him. In one of the private wings, a phone was ringing. He could hear it faintly through the walls. It rang and rang. And rang. No one answered. Thomas felt the shift then. Not in the building. Not in the schedule. In the story itself, the story everyone thought they knew. He didn't know what Meghan had said, or where she was going, or what decision had been made behind closed doors. But he knew one thing. After today, nothing would be the same, and somewhere deep in the palace, someone else was about to realize it too. If you're loving this story, hit that subscribe button now, because what happens next will blow your mind. The Queen's private secretary noticed it first. Her name was Caroline. She had worked in the palace for 23 years. She knew every routine, every ritual, every small detail that kept the royal machine running. And this morning, one detail was missing. The Duchess of Sussex had not confirmed her attendance at the afternoon engagement. That wasn't unusual by itself. Schedules shifted. People got sick. Plans changed. But when Caroline called Meghan's office, no one answered. She tried the assistant. No answer. She tried the Duke's private line. Straight to voicemail. Caroline set down her phone. She stared at her computer screen. The afternoon schedule glowed back at her. The Duchess was supposed to appear at a charity event. Cameras would be there, press, donors. The event had been planned for months, and now, 2 hours before departure, no one could reach her. Caroline stood, smoothed her skirt, walked down the corridor toward the private wing. Her heels clicked against the floor. The sound was too loud in the quiet. She passed Thomas at his post. He looked at her. Their eyes met for just a second. She saw something there. Concern, maybe more. "Have you seen the Duchess this morning?" she asked. "She passed by earlier," Thomas said. His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. "Where did she go?" "Toward the west exit." Caroline's stomach dropped. The west exit led to the private courtyard, the one used for discreet departures. She thanked him, kept walking. Her mind raced. The west exit meant cars. It meant leaving without ceremony. Without announcement, she reached the private secretary's office, knocked, entered without waiting for permission. Inside, 2 other staff members were on their phones. Both looked up when she entered. Both had the same expression. "We can't reach her," one of them said. "I know," Caroline replied. "The event starts in 2 hours." "I know. What do we do?" Caroline didn't answer. She walked to the window, looked down at the courtyard. Empty. No cars. No movement. But earlier that morning, there had been a car. She had seen it from another window. A black SUV, not a royal vehicle. Something private. It had been parked near the side entrance, and then it was gone. She turned back to the staff. "Call the Duke's office again. If he doesn't answer, go there in person. And if he's not there, then we have a problem." The staff member nodded. Left the room, Caroline sat down. Pulled up the morning security logs on her computer. Every entrance and exit was recorded. Every vehicle. Every person. She scrolled through the list. And there it was. 647 hours. West exit. Vehicle departure. 2 passengers. The Duchess. And the Duke no return time logged? Caroline's hands went cold. They had left, together early. Without telling anyone, she picked up her phone. Dialed the Queen's direct line. It rang 3 times before someone answered. "Her Majesty is in a meeting," the voice said. "I need to speak with her. It's urgent." "Regarding?" Caroline hesitated. She chose her words carefully. "The Duchess of Sussex has left the palace. We don't know where she is, and we don't know if she's coming back." There was silence on the other end. Then quietly, "I'll inform Her Majesty immediately." The line went dead. Caroline set down the phone. Her heart pounded. She had been through crises before. Protocol breaches, media scandals, family disputes, but this felt different. This felt like the beginning of something no one was prepared for. She stood, walked back into the corridor. Thomas was still at his post. She approached him again. "What did she say to you?" Caroline asked. Thomas looked at her. His face was unreadable. "She thanked me. For what?" "She didn't say." Caroline nodded slowly. She understood. It was a goodbye. Somewhere in the palace, phones were starting to ring. Voices were rising. Meetings were being called, but Caroline already knew the truth. The Duchess wasn't coming back today, and when the world found out why, everything was going to explode. Asterisk, asterisk by noon. The palace was in chaos, not the loud kind. Not the kind that journalists could see. This was the quiet chaos. The kind that happens behind locked doors. In whispered phone calls, in the eyes of staff who suddenly didn't know what to do. The charity event had been canceled. Quietly, the excuse given was a sudden illness. The press accepted it. For now, but inside the palace, no one believed it. The Queen had been informed. She had said nothing, simply nodded, dismissed everyone from the room, and then she had sat alone. Her Majesty didn't panic. She had lived through wars, scandals, divorces, the death of a princess. She had seen the monarchy bend, but never break. But this was different. This wasn't a scandal. This was a fracture. The Duke and Duchess had not returned. Their phones were off. Their security team had been told to stand down. No one knew where they were, except one person. A junior press officer named Sophie had received an email that morning. It had come from an address she didn't recognize. No subject line. Just a single sentence. Please forward this to the communications director immediately. Attached was a PDF, a statement, written in careful, legal language, signed by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Sophie had opened it. Read the first line, and nearly dropped her coffee. She had printed it, walked it to her supervisor, waited while he read it, watched his face turn pale. He had taken it to the communications director. Who took it to the private secretary? Who took it to the Queen's office? And now, the document sat on a table in a private meeting room. 6 people stood around it. No one spoke. Asterisk, the statement was clear. The Duke and Duchess were stepping back from royal duties, from public life, from the institution. They were leaving. The Queen's private secretary broke the silence. When do they plan to release this? Tonight, someone said. 6 p.m., that gives us 5 hours. To do what? To stop it. To negotiate? 2, they're not negotiating. The voice came from the doorway. It was the Queen's senior advisor, an older man, sharp, unshakable. He walked into the room, closed the door behind him, spoke with the Duke an hour ago. He was calm, polite, and completely resolved. This isn't a cry for help. It's a decision. They've already made it. They can't just leave, someone said. There are protocols, responsibilities, the public asterisk. The public will have questions, the advisor interrupted, and we need to have answers. Before they release that statement, what do we tell them? The truth, as much as we can, which is... The advisor looked down at the statement, then back at the group. That the Duke and Duchess have chosen a different path, that the family supports their decision, that the monarchy will continue. Will it? Everyone turned to look at the person who asked. It was Caroline. She stood at the edge of the table. Her face was tight. Will it continue? She repeated. Because this isn't just a resignation. This is a message, and the world is going to hear it loud and clear. What message? Someone asked that this institution broke them. The room went silent. The advisor shook his head. That's not the message we're sending. It doesn't matter what message we send, Caroline said. It matters what message people hear. She was right. Everyone in the room knew it. The Duke and Duchess were loved, especially by the younger generation, by people who saw them as a symbol of change, of progress, of something new, and now they were leaving. People would ask why. They would dig. They would blame, and the palace would be the target. The advisor straightened. His voice was firm. We draft a response. We prepare the family. We brief the press. And we make sure this doesn't spiral into something we can't control. What if it already has? Caroline asked quietly. No one answered. Somewhere in London, the Duke and Duchess sat together. In a private home, away from cameras, away from staff, away from the weight of crowns they never wanted to wear. Meghan looked at her husband. He looked back. Are you sure? He asked. I'm sure, she said. They're going to fight us. Let them. He smiled, tired but free. In 5 hours, the world would know, and nothing would ever be the same. At exactly 6 p.m., the statement went live. Not through the palace, not through official channels. The Duke and Duchess posted it themselves. On their own website, in their own words, within minutes, it was everywhere. News alerts lit up phones around the world. Television programs were interrupted. Social media exploded. Reporters scrambled. Cameras rushed to the palace gates. The statement was short, direct, devastating. It explained their decision to step back, to pursue financial independence, to split their time between the UK and North America, to continue supporting the Queen but on their own terms. It was polite, respectful, firm, and the world lost its mind in the palace. The Queen's advisors gathered around a television. They watched the headlines roll in, watched commentators dissect every word, watched the public react in real time. Some people cheered, called them brave, said they were finally free. Others were furious, called them selfish, said they had abandoned their duty. But everyone had an opinion. The Queen sat in her private study. Alone, she had read the statement twice. Once when it was brought to her hours ago, and once more when it went live, she understood it. More than anyone, she had lived her entire life in service, had given up dreams, relationships, freedom for the crown, and she had never. But she also knew that the world had changed, that the monarchy had to change with it, or it would die. Her grandson had made a choice to protect his wife, his family, his peace. She couldn't fault him for that, even if it broke something in the process. There was a knock at the door. Her private secretary entered. "Your Majesty, the press is requesting a statement. Tell them we are aware, and that we support the Duke and Duchess in their decision. That's all." For now, the secretary hesitated. "Ma'am, there's something else. The media has started digging. They're asking questions about what led to this, about tensions within the family, about—" "I know what they're asking," the Queen said quietly, "and they will continue to ask. Let them, and if they find something, then we will deal with it. As we always have." The secretary nodded. Left the room, the Queen turned back to the window. Outside, the palace grounds were lit by camera flashes. Reporters lined the gates. The world was watching. She thought about Meghan, about the young woman who had walked into this family with hope, with love, with plans to make a difference. And she thought about how quickly that hope had been crushed, not by malice, but by tradition, by expectation, by a system that was never built for someone like her. The Queen had seen it happen before. Diana, Fergie, women who didn't fit the mold, who tried to change things, who were punished for it, and now it was happening again. She closed her eyes for just a moment, allowed herself to feel the weight of it. Then she opened them, straightened her shoulders, and turned away from the window. There was work to do across the city. In a quiet home far from the palace, Meghan sat on a couch. Her phone buzzed constantly. Messages, calls, alerts. She ignored them all. Harry sat beside her, his hand in hers. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I will be," she said. "They're going to come after us, I know. They're going to twist this, make us the villains. Let them." He looked at her, saw the strength in her eyes, the same strength that had made him fall in love with her, the same strength that had terrified his family. "I'm proud of you," he said. She smiled, leaned her head on his shoulder. Outside, the world was spinning. Headlines were being written. Debates were being had. History was being made. But in that moment, they were just two people, tired, relieved, free. Thomas the guard stood at his post. He had been there for 14 hours. His shift should have ended, but no one had come to relieve him. The palace was in lockdown mode. Everyone was needed. Everyone was on edge. He stared down the corridor. The same corridor where Meghan had walked that morning, where she had said goodbye. He had known. Somehow he had known something was ending, and now everyone else knew too. A staff member hurried past, stopped, looked at him. "Did you see her this morning?" Thomas nodded. "What was she like?" He thought about it. About the way she had smiled. The way she had looked at him, calm, he said, like she had finally made peace with something. The staff member nodded, hurried away. Thomas returned to his post, and he wondered if the palace would ever be the same. Asterisk, asterisk, the next morning. The palace was a fortress. Security had been doubled. Gates were closed. Staff were instructed to say nothing to the press. Every phone call was monitored. Every email screened. But the damage was done. The statement had been seen by millions. The story was everywhere. And now the questions were coming. Why did they really leave? What happened behind closed doors? Who was to blame? The tabloids had a field day. Headlines screamed accusations. Sources close to the palace spoke anonymously. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some blamed Meghan. called her difficult, said she had never fit in, that she had poisoned the Duke against his family. Others blamed the institution, said it was racist, cold, that it had driven her out. The truth, as always, was somewhere in between. Inside the palace, the mood was grim. Staff moved, quietly. Conversations were clipped. Everyone felt the weight of the crisis, but there was one person who refused to be shaken. Carolyn. The private secretary sat in her office. She had barely slept. Her desk was covered in papers, statements, schedules, crisis management plans. But her mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about something Meghan had said months ago. In passing, they had been walking through the palace gardens. Meghan had stopped, looked up at the building, and said quietly, "It's beautiful, but it's a cage." At the time, Caroline had laughed, said something polite, moved on. But now, those words echoed, because Meghan had been right. The palace was beautiful, historic, powerful, but it was also suffocating, rigid, unforgiving. And for someone like Meghan, someone who valued freedom, authenticity, change it had been unbearable. Caroline wondered if things could have been different, if someone had listened, if someone had cared, but the palace didn't work that way. It didn't adapt. It didn't bend. It simply existed. And anyone who couldn't survive it was left behind. There was a knock at the door. One of the junior staff entered. She looked exhausted. The Duke's office just released a follow-up statement. She said. Caroline took the paper. Read it quickly. It was short, but it clarified something important. The Duke and Duchess were not abandoning their duties. They were redefining them. They would still support charities, still advocate for causes they believed in, still serve, but they would do it their way. On their terms. Caroline set down the paper. Smart, she said quietly, is it? The junior staffer asked. People are still angry. People will always be angry, Caroline said. But this shows they're not running. They're fighting, and that's harder to criticize. The staffer nodded. Left the room. Caroline leaned back in her chair, stared at the ceiling. She thought about the monarchy, about its future, about what it would look like in 20 years, 50 years. Would it survive? Would it adapt? Or would it crumble under the weight of its own traditions? She didn't know. But she knew one thing. This was the beginning of something, not the end. Across town, Meghan sat at a small table, a cup of tea in front of her, untouched. She was reading the headlines. The good ones, the bad ones, the vicious ones. Harry had told her not to. Said it would only hurt, but she needed to see, needed to know what they were saying. Most of it was predictable. The same accusations, the same defenses. But there was one article that made her pause. It was written by a journalist she respected, someone who had covered the royal family for decades. The headline read, "The Duchess didn't break the monarchy. She revealed it." Meghan read the article slowly. It talked about the cracks that had always been there, the outdated traditions, the lack of support for those who struggled, the silence around mental health. It said that Meghan hadn't caused the problems. She had simply refused to ignore them. And in doing so, she had forced everyone else to see them too. Meghan set down her phone. For the first time in days, she felt something other than exhaustion. She felt hope. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning. Maybe by leaving, they had done more for the monarchy than they ever could have by staying. That evening, the Queen made a rare public appearance. She attended a small event, a charity dinner, nothing major. But the symbolism was clear. Life goes on. The monarchy endures. When asked about the Duke and Duchess, she smiled, said only, "We wish them well. Family is family, always." It was a perfect response. Kind, firm, final. But as she left the event, climbed into her car, and rode back to the palace, she allowed herself a moment of sadness, because she knew the truth. Her grandson was gone, not forever, But in the way that mattered, he had chosen love over duty. And she couldn't blame him, because if she was honest, there had been times when she had wanted to do the same. 3 weeks later, the storm had passed. The headlines had moved on. The outrage had faded. The world had found something new to talk about. But the palace was different now. Staff moved with a new kind of caution. Conversations about the Duke and Duchess were avoided. The subject was closed, sealed away like a wound no one wanted to touch. But the wound was still there. Thomas the guard had been reassigned. Not as punishment, just routine. But he knew the real reason. He had been there. He had seen Meghan that morning. The palace wanted to move on from anyone who reminded them of that day. He didn't mind. He had served long enough, seen enough. He requested a transfer to a quieter post. It was granted immediately, on his last day at the main residence. He walked through the corridors one final time. He paused at the spot where Meghan had stopped, where she had looked at him, thanked him. He still didn't know exactly what she had been thanking him for. Maybe for his service, for his kindness, or maybe just for being a witness, for seeing her, for recognizing that she was more than a headline. He hoped she was happy now, wherever she was. He hoped they both where Caroline stayed. She had considered leaving, but she loved the work, loved the history, loved the idea of something bigger than herself. But she made a promise. If she ever saw someone struggling, like someone drowning in the weight of expectations, someone who didn't fit the mold, she would listen. She would help. She wouldn't let it happen again. Because the truth was, Meghan hadn't been the problem. The system had been. And if the monarchy wanted to survive, it had to change. Slowly, carefully. But it had to change. The Queen understood this. She had always understood. In her final years, she began to shift things. Small things. Quiet things. More support for those who married into the family. More flexibility in roles. More honesty about mental health. It wasn't a revolution, but it was progress. And it was because of Meghan. Because of what she had revealed. What she had risked. The Duchess would never know. She had moved on into new life. Found peace. But her impact remained. In the conversations that were finally being had. In the changes that were slowly being made. In the cracks that could no longer be ignored. Months later, on a quiet afternoon, the Queen sat in her study. She held a letter at her arrival that morning. From California, it was short, polite. Grateful, the Duke and Duchess thanked her for her understanding, for her support, for giving them the space to heal. They said they would visit. When the time was right, they said they still loved the family, still respected the institution. But they also said they were happy. Truly happy. The first time in years. The Queen set down the letter. Smiled softly. She thought about that morning, when Meghan had walked past the guard. Spoken softly. It's made a choice. It had seemed like a small moment. A quiet goodbye. But it had changed everything. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Not in anger, not in defeat, but with dignity, with purpose, with love. Meghan had done that. And in doing so, she had shown the world something important. That the crown doesn't make you royal. Your courage does. Thomas sat in a pub that evening, finally relaxed. A friend asked him about his time at the palace, asked if he had any good stories. He smiled, took a sip of his drink. Just one, he said. Tell me. Thomas thought about it. About that morning. About the look in Meghan's eyes. I once saw someone choose freedom, he said. And it was the most royal thing I'd ever witnessed. His friend laughed. Thought he was joking, but Thomas wasn't. Because he had been there. He'd felt the shift. And he knew that some moments, no matter how quiet, change everything. The world kept spinning. The palace kept standing. The monarchy endured. But it was different now, because one woman had spoken softly, had made a choice, had walked away, and in doing so, had reminded everyone what really mattered. Not titles, not tradition, not duty, but love, truth, freedom. And sometimes, the greatest act of loyalty is knowing when to let go.